In 1961, a shocking and heartbreaking incident occurred in the waters near the Bahamas. A young girl was discovered floating alone at sea, desperately holding onto a small cork float. The sight left the crew of a passing freighter in disbelief as they stumbled upon her. At first, they struggled to grasp the reality before them. A young girl, barely clinging to life, adrift and helpless in the vast expanse of the ocean. The girl, as they would soon learn, was 11-year-old Terry Jo Dupereau, and her survival was nothing short of miraculous. But how had she ended up in such a dire situation, lost and alone in the unforgiving waters of the Atlantic Ocean? The story behind her presence there is one that continues to shock and haunt those who hear it. Terry Jo's journey to this part of the world was never supposed to end this way. In fact, it was meant to be a joyful, once-in-a-lifetime vacation for her family. Dr. Arthur Dupereau, a 41-year-old optometrist from Green Bay, Wisconsin, had dreamed of taking his wife and children on an unforgettable trip. He and his 38-year-old wife, Jean, had saved diligently for years to make this dream a reality. Their 3 children, 14-year-old Brian, 11-year-old Terry Jo, and 7-year-old Renee, were equally excited. Their parents had promised them an adventure, something they would cherish forever. So, in preparation for their long-awaited vacation, the Dupereaus chartered a 60-foot ketch named Bluebell and planned a week-long excursion. The journey would begin in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and take them to the breathtaking islands of the Bahamas, where they could bask in the sun, swim in crystal-clear waters, and explore the beauty of the region. The Bluebell departed on November 8, 1961, carrying the entire Dupereau family safely on board. The ship was under the command of Julian Harvey, a seasoned sailor who had also brought his wife, Mary Dean, along for the journey. The weather was favorable, the sea was tranquil, and everything appeared to be going smoothly as the voyage began. For 4 blissful days, the Dupereaus enjoyed their time at sea. The Bluebell made its way east, heading toward the idyllic islands of Bimini before reaching their next stop, Sandy Point, a small community on the island of Great Abaco. Here, the family took full advantage of the beautiful location. They dropped anchor, eager to explore. The children marveled at the colorful shells they found along the pristine beaches, while their parents relished the rare opportunity to unwind in such a tranquil setting. Toward the end of their stay on the island, Dr. Dupereau spoke with Roderick W. Pinder, the village commissioner of Sandy Point. It was in this casual conversation that he made a statement that would later send chills down the spines of those who recalled it. "This has been a once-in-a-lifetime vacation. We'll be back before Christmas." At the time, no one could have known that those words would never come true. The Bluebell set sail once again, and as night fell on November 12th, the return journey began. The Dupereaus expected to be back home soon, but their fate had already been sealed. Young Terry Jo, weary from the day's activities, chose to retreat early to her cabin below deck. The soothing motion of the ship rocked her into a restful sleep. However, her rest was abruptly shattered by the sound of her brother's desperate screams. "I was awakened by my brother screaming, 'Help, Daddy, help!'" Terry Jo, who later changed her name to Terry Dupereau Fassbender, recalled in an interview with Fox News nearly 50 years later, "It was the type of scream that you know that something horrible is happening." Unbeknownst to Terry Jo, her family's dream vacation had turned into a nightmare. Julian Harvey, the captain of the Bluebell, had decided that this would be the night he would commit a horrific act. Harvey, a 44-year-old former military pilot with a troubled past, had taken out a life insurance policy on his wife, Mary Dean, just months earlier. Investigators later uncovered that his plan was to make her vanish at sea and claim the insurance payout. It was a meticulously devised scheme, but it did not unfold as he had anticipated. It was not the first time that Harvey had been linked to suspicious deaths. Authorities later learned that one of his previous wives had perished in a car accident that he had miraculously survived. Additionally, both his yacht and his powerboat had mysteriously sunk under circumstances that led to substantial insurance claims. This time, however, his plan would take an even darker turn. On that fateful night, Harvey carried out his sinister plan, harming his wife with fatal intent. However, his actions did not go unnoticed. Dr. Duperreau, hearing the disturbance, rushed to intervene, only for Harvey to turn against him as well. One by one, the Duperreau family members, awakened by the chaos, faced a tragic end. That left only Terry Jo, who had remained asleep in her cabin, unaware of the horror unfolding above her. When she finally emerged, she was met with a horrifying sight. Terrified and confused, she stumbled onto the deck, searching for answers. When she confronted Harvey, he reacted quickly, shoving her back below deck. Terry Jo returned to her bunk, trembling in fear. It wasn't until she felt water rising around her that she realized she had to act. By then, Harvey had deliberately sabotaged the ship, opening the seacocks to sink it and destroy any evidence of his crime. In what appeared to be an attempt to manipulate her into staying put, he handed Terry Jo a rope connected to a dinghy and told her to hold on. But it soon became clear that Harvey had no intention of allowing her to escape. Years later, Terry Jo's friend, Richard D. Logan, would reflect on Harvey's possible thought process. When he saw her on deck, he realized, "Oh my God, there's a chance she might make it. I need to stop her." So he went forward to grab a knife or something to prevent her survival. But she did not hold on to the line. Instead, Terry Jo, overwhelmed by the chaotic and terrifying situation, dropped the rope, feeling her heart race as panic took over. She watched as Harvey allegedly dove into the sea, his strokes determined and urgent as he tried to catch up with the dinghy that was drifting away. For a fleeting moment she hoped he would succeed, that he would return and somehow save them both. But that moment quickly faded. In effect, by pursuing the small boat instead of staying with her, he abandoned her on the sinking ship, leaving her to face the merciless ocean alone. But the newly orphaned girl, though fragile in appearance, was a lot tougher than she looked. Resilience was buried deep within her, a quality she hadn't even realized she possessed. With no one to guide her, she relied on sheer instinct. Terry Jo said that she unfastened a tiny cork float from the boat, her hands shaking as she worked against time, and sailed away on it just as the Bluebell, the only world she had left, disappeared beneath the waves. The sight of it vanishing left her breathless. It was as though the last remnant of her past had been erased, swallowed by the depths. Thereafter, wearing just a light blouse and rosy pants, she was completely at the mercy of the elements. The ocean, vast and endless, surrounded her on all sides, offering no comfort, no sign of rescue. At night, she would have been freezing cold, her body trembling uncontrollably as the wind howled around her. The ocean beneath her, deceptively calm at times, carried an eerie stillness that only deepened her sense of isolation. In the day, the sun was relentless, an unyielding force that glared down hard, its rays scorching her exposed skin, draining her strength with each passing hour. Dehydration began to set in. Her lips cracked, her throat parched. With Terry Jo adrift alone in the vast ocean, the likelihood of her survival appeared impossible. It felt as though she had been cast into an infinite emptiness, abandoned by the world. The probability of a passing aircraft or ship noticing her was painfully low. Yet, she held on to hope, even as despair threatened to consume her. One day, a small aircraft suddenly appeared overhead, its engine breaking the eerie silence of the open sea. Her pulse quickened. She waved, she screamed, mustering every ounce of energy left in her fragile body. For a moment, she believed she had been seen. Relief flooded her. But alas, the pilots did not spot her. The aircraft continued on its course, disappearing into the horizon as if it had never been there at all. That said, someone, or rather something, had spotted her. As she floated, her senses dulled by exhaustion, an eerie presence beneath the water caught her attention. One afternoon, Terry Joe reportedly spied mysterious forms moving beneath the ocean's surface near her raft. Her breath hitched. The shapes were approaching, slowly but steadily. Were they sharks? Would this be how it ended? Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. Panicked, her mind racing, she braced herself for the worst. But then, a moment of clarity. She saw them for what they truly were. Porpoises. Their sleek bodies cut through the water gracefully, moving alongside her raft, as if they were watching over her. A wave of relief washed over her, but it was fleeting. The harsh environment soon took its toll, and Terry Joe, weakened and exhausted, began to hallucinate. At one point, for instance, she imagined a small boat in the distance, an island up ahead, a beacon of salvation. Her heart pounded with renewed energy. She had to reach it. Frantically, she splashed towards it, using whatever strength she had left. But the more she moved, the further the island seemed. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. It had never been real. At last, her body could endure no more. Darkness consumed her as she collapsed into oblivion, her mind surrendering to exhaustion and despair. But all was not lost. Somewhere in the vast, indifferent ocean, fate intervened. Eventually, Captain Theo, a Greek freighter passing through the Northwest Providence Channel off the coast of the Bahamas, spotted something unusual in the water. The crew gathered, squinting against the glare of the sun. It was a small form, barely distinguishable against the vast blue. As they got closer, realization dawned. It was a girl, barely alive, clinging to a tiny raft. Terry Joe was on the brink of collapse, her body overwhelmed by a fever of 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Her sun-exposed skin was raw and covered in agonizing burns. Severe dehydration had drained her of all strength, and yet she was still there. One of the crew members quickly snapped a photograph of her frail form, floating helplessly in the tiny boat against the backdrop of an endless ocean. That image would later make headlines around the world, capturing the unimaginable resilience of a child lost at sea. 3 days earlier, the Coast Guard had uncovered another finding, Harvey drifting in Bluebell's dinghy. However, he was not alone. Alongside him was Renee's motionless body. When interrogated, his account was riddled with contradictions. He claimed that a sudden storm had battered the ship, sparking a fire that ultimately sank the vessel. He even insisted that he had tried to revive Terry Joe after supposedly finding her in the water, but had failed. But the truth has a way of coming to light. Soon after hearing the news of Terry Joe's miraculous rescue, Harvey made a tragic decision. Authorities later discovered him unresponsive behind his hotel room's bathroom door, leaving behind more questions than answers. Meanwhile, Terry Joe, barely clinging to life, was taken to a Miami hospital. There, surrounded by doctors and nurses, she began the slow process of recovery. Some 7 days after her dramatic rescue, the police finally sat down with the brave little girl. For the first time, she spoke of that terrible night, her voice steady despite the horrors she recounted. Her family, now lost to the sea, was later memorialized at the Fort Howard Memorial Park in Wisconsin. Years passed before Terry Jo found the strength to truly face her past. In the 1980s, she slowly began opening up to a few close friends about her ordeal. This led her to seek psychiatric care, a step that would eventually bring her to co-author a book with Richard Logan. Titled Alone, Orphaned on the Ocean, the book delves deep into her harrowing experience. Finally, in May 2010, almost half a century after her nightmare at sea, Terry Jo published the book. Its impact was immediate. Reflecting on her childhood ordeal in an interview with Today News, she said, "I was never frightened. I was an outdoors child and I loved the water." She added, "I had strong faith. I believed in God and I prayed for Him to help me, and I just went with the flow." Even today, Terry Jo's life remains connected to the water. She has credited the book as the final step in her healing process, and she hopes that by sharing her story, she can help others who have faced tragedy. "I always believed I was saved for a reason," she said in her 48 Hours interview, "but it took me 50 years to gain the strength to be able to give other people hope with my story." Did you enjoy this story? What do you think about Terry's courage? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, please subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Thanks to his courage and faith, Terry is alive today, happily married, and has 3 children. Thank you so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.